I was expecting, this is such a small crowd. Oh my goodness. I am Shelley Woodruff. I am one of the pastors here at First Baptist Church of Decatur. And so on behalf of the church, I wanted to say welcome to this space for these events. We have the opportunity to do yet another Conversations event, and each time we do these, they're really special because they let us partner yet again with Georgia Center for the Book, who does amazing work right here in our own backyard within the literary community and within literary arts. And it also gives us a chance to partner with one of our local independent bookstores. Charis Books is such a delight to work with. We love watching what they do, how they do it, the community they're building in Decatur. So anytime Charis says, will you make space available for one of our authors, we try our darndest to say yes. So the conversation events are great because they allow all of that, but they're also great because they give us an opportunity to provide space for an author, an idea, a story to be shared in community. And sometimes we open up our space and we get stories that are on the theological realm or on historical fiction or historical research or maybe really some fun ones that we've had in the past, social justice. And then sometimes we get an author who comes in who shares stories about feminine rage and moral ambiguity and sapphic vampires. And we say, yes, please. So we are delighted to have this author here on our stage to talk about her newest work, #1 bestselling New York Times book right now. And also to host her delightful community of fans. A quick housekeeping note, we do have restrooms behind you in the narthex that are down the stairs, but we do also have accessible and gender-neutral ones behind me in the hallway on either side. So it's okay for you to stand up and go this way if you need to during the event. But without further ado, I would really love to introduce to you E.R. from Charis Books.
Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you to Pastor Shelley. Thank you to everyone who makes the First Baptist Church of Decatur a welcoming and exciting place to gather. Deborah, who helps shepherd all of our volunteers. Miss Ann, who has been here as the volunteer welcoming person in the back room since the 60s, which is incredible. I like to think about all the people that she has met in this space. Randall, all of the people who help make this space what it is. It's really important to me that we get to do queer affirming events in a Baptist church like this here in Decatur, Georgia. It was very important to V.E. Schwab that she got to come to Georgia and be here with all of you. And it was really important to the tour that they work with Charis as a feminist and independent queer bookstore. So, yeah. I know some of y'all have traveled from far away. How many of y'all are from out of the state of Georgia? Raise your hand. All right, that's awesome. Thank you for traveling. Love to see it. I know this is a really special day. I know some of y'all are like super duper fans. So yes, all right, great. Our conversation partner today is Dr. Susana Morris. I am a super duper fan of Dr. Susana Morris. The reason that I wanted her to be in conversation with V today is because she is someone who thinks a lot about speculative fiction from a Black feminist perspective and has done deep, deep scholarly work on where speculative fiction is going, where it's been. Most importantly, she has a book coming out on August 18th. That is the definitive biography of Octavia Butler. And yeah, I appreciate that reaction, yes. So, Positive Obsession comes out on October 18th. And we were like, look, this book is about sapphic vampires. And even though Octavia Butler was not queer in the perhaps literal sense, she enabled queer worlds to exist, right? And she wrote some really great vampires. And so I really wanted Susana to get to talk with you about this book and about how we create feminist worlds, particularly in speculative fiction, right? And how we just make more space for ourselves through the pages of books. Because we all need that right now. That's why, again, I'm grateful to the Georgia Center for the Book for helping make more space for us, to the First Baptist Church of Decatur, and to all of you. So the structure of this event is really simple. Because there's so many of us, we asked folks to submit questions ahead of time, so we're not going to have a Q&A or anything afterwards. The Q&A will come from the questions that you've already submitted. So Susana's going to ask her questions for about 45 minutes, and then there will be the Q&A from y'all's user-submitted questions. So let's put our hands together and welcome New York Times, USA Today, Indie List, #1 best-selling author V.E. Schwab, and Dr. Susana Morris.
What a welcome.
What a warm welcome. Oh.
Hello.
Hello, hello. Welcome to Atlanta.
I am so happy
To
to
Decatur,
be here.
where it's greater.
Yes. I am so happy to be here today.
We're delighted to have you here.
Yeah, this is,
Yes.
I can't think of a better way to spend a Saturday afternoon than in church talking about toxic lesbian vampires, so.
I mean, that's the only way I want to do it.
Exactly.
Oh my goodness. Well, can we launch right in?
Let's do it. We got a lot to get to.
We have a lot to talk about. Ooh, this book took me on some twists and turns. My partner can attest to it because I kept on being like,
it's a
my
lot.
goodness, it's a lot. So maybe we can start at the beginning with your inspiration.
Sure.
What led you to write this particular book?
Sure. Many things, right? I have always loved vampires. I have always, though, believed that vampires are an inherently queer genre. If you go back, you look at the canonical works, you go back to The Vampire, you go back to Carmilla, you go back to Dracula, all the way up through Anne Rice, like, they are, by definition, queer. They tend to be about defiance of the binary, defiance of the gender and sexuality boundaries. They're about desire. They're about carnal knowledge. They're about a one-way street. Like, the whole, like, moral in Carmilla is, like, if you go down that way, you cannot come back. Of course, expecting that you want to come back. Like, what if you just want to keep going that way? So I wanted to explore queer vampires. I really wanted to explore a lesbian villain because, I mean, why not? I love villains, and for years I was kind of gently pressured not to, and sometimes not so gently pressured not to. The argument that was posed to me was like, oh, don't do that, because people will assume that you're conflating queerness and villainy.
Right.
And at like a passing glance, that argument seems to hold weight until what you realize you're being told is that queer characters, and by extension queer humans, are not entitled to the same nuance and complexity as their straight counterparts on the page or in life, right? What you're being told is you better be minding your trauma, pain, or on a pedestal at all times. So I took umbrage, but I was still scared. I was scared of putting a foot out of line. And something that you need to understand about this book is it is in many ways a reckoning, not just with publishing, but with myself.
Oh, say more about that.
I came into adult fantasy as a young woman. That is already not a super welcome combination. I mean, I went by my initials. I did everything I could from the moment I entered adult fantasy to make myself smaller, to ripple less, to not make waves, because I wanted to belong and I wanted to succeed, and I thought those things were necessary, right? So I made myself small, and it only hurt myself, right? And then I came out, and I made my sexuality small, the same way I had made my gender small. I continued to make myself small to fit into these spaces, and I continued to listen to those voices that were like, don't do that, don't risk it, right? And then I think a lot of things happened. I just hit a break point.
Yeah.
I got tired. I realized about 12 years in that I was in making an effort to assimilate hurting only me. right? That those people who didn't want me in the rooms or at their tables, who weren't making space for me, were never going to make space for me no matter how I acted.
No matter what you did.
No, and it wasn't about them, right? It was about me needing to get comfortable in my own skin, in my own story. And like, I marginalized myself for years. Like, I put my own story at the periphery instead of the center because I let myself believe that's the only place it could be. And then The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue happened. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Book number 20 happened. I loved how many think pieces came out that were like, this debut, and I was like, And what happened, two things happened. One, that book was massively successful. And my books before that had been very, very successful, but this success was on a slightly new scale. And I made a rule with myself, which is that we will only transmute success into boldness. We will not transmute success into safety, right? Like,
Yes.
and I'm sure you've seen this. Often an author will have like a meteoric success. One book will just be that successful. And what they'll do is that they will treat that space as like the circumscription now of where they will stand. They're like, well, that did well. This feels safe. I will now create only that. And I don't blame them because it's safe. But that's not where my creative joy lies. So I was like, I can transmute the success of Addie LaRue into the freedom to write authentically the story that I want to write, knowing that the publisher will support it. Because I basically went to them and I was like, hey, Tor, remember Addie? It was so great. You made a lot of money. Wasn't that nice for you? And they were like, yeah, it was so nice. And I was like, right. I have another standalone for you. And they were like, oh, what is it? And I'm like, it's Toxic Lesbian Vampires. And to their credit, didn't blink. They were like, you have worked, you have built this following, you have built this audience. If you write it, we will do everything we can. Like, we will support it. So I was like, we're transmuting the Addie LaRue success into the thing I wanted to write next, which was lesbian villain and queer vampires and like gothic romanticism. The other factor there was that when everyone read Addie LaRue, they assumed I was Addie. I am not. I'm Henry. I am a young mortal character struggling with time and with place and with space and with the sense of my life passing me by. I was all of these things, and I wanted them to read a book and be like, oh, you're this character, and be right? So I started to ask, what's the immortality narrative that I feel I still want to do? Because I was really fascinated by immortality. And I was like, I want to write the flip side of the coin. So Addie LaRue is a story of immortality and hope. This is a story of immortality and hunger. And hunger in all the forms it takes, right? The hunger to be seen, to be loved, to be known, and to take up space in a world that tries to make you small. That's what this is.
I mean, thank you for that. It does read like a reclamation. It reads like a complicated reclamation, and how it's always important, but as queer folk, it's so important in this particular political moment that we're in to show queer characters who inhabit the range of human emotions and not boxed into just a villain or a very respectable queer.
Yeah, and all three. So like, I remember one of my first fight backs was like, they were like, don't do it. You're gonna have like a tokenizing lesbian. I was like, great, they're all lesbians now. Like, you're worried about me having a token lesbian? Great, everyone's gay. Now are you happy? Because like, I would have done that anyway, but I wanted to show like, one, nothing is monolithic, but also like these three young women are so different.
Very much
and yet
so.
all so messy. And I really wanted to kind of put them on the spectrum of everything they were feeling. The spectrum of antagonism, the spectrum of like sense of self. Like Alice is, like the purpose of the three stages of my own coming out, really. Alice has no idea who she is or who she wants to be. Charlotte knows who she is and is terrified of not being loved for it. Sabine knows who she is and is deeply unapologetic, and I am in my Sabine era now. I was like, we are not apologizing.
Yes. Minus the killing.
Minus the serial killing and the token taking, but otherwise. Otherwise, I think, as you were saying, like right now it's so important to not only exist, but to like stand to like 10 toes down and be like, no, I will not be small for you. I will not shrink myself. I will not go back into a closet. Like the more you push, the more I'm going to push back and say like, this is where we are, right? This is like, you hold the space for people who are more vulnerable than you, for people who are more at risk than you. And it's more essential now than ever to use any form of privilege you have to hold space for those with less of it.
Period.
Yeah.
So maybe we can talk a little bit about characterization,
Yeah.
since we sort of started going down that road. And you mentioned that the main characters are all really quite different.
Yeah.
And so I'm interested as a writer, though a nonfiction writer
Yeah.
primarily, in sort of your thought process as you're thinking about villain / antihero, maybe?
Yeah.
Okay. And sort of these different steps. I don't want to say maiden, mother, crone, because that's
But
like,
it's a
but
little,
bit.
in their own iterations. I think so I build them holistically.
Okay.
Basically, I like to look at my theme. My theme is hunger, the idea of insatiability, right? All three of these young women are hungry. They're all hungry, and they're all at this precipice. Like the thing I love about vampires is that not only are they inherently queer, but if you look at like the transactional nature, it is a lot like a coming out narrative in and of itself. It is the death of an old self and the birth of a new self. And even if the old self wasn't the self you wanted to be, there is grief. There is grief that comes with shedding the self that you leave behind. There is grief for the people that don't follow with you. I feel grief for my adolescence that I didn't have. I came out late, and so like I never really had teen years that were in any way authentic, and I never will, right? I grieve different versions of myself. And so all three of these women are essentially trapped in situational cycles, societal ones or internal ones, and then have that transactional moment of a woman coming into their life and saying, did you know there's another way? And I can show it to you, right? Now, it's not always a good, like, this is the thing, right? This is the messiness, which is that in queer community especially, the first person who comes into your life and says, I see you not as you're presenting, but as you really are, that person has an extraordinary amount of power.
Yeah.
They are totemic to you. And if they are good and healthy for you, then that can be love. And if they are not, it can be abuse, right? It can be really tricky we want to like just give them carte blanche because they're so important to us. But sometimes like it's about realizing that they might not actually be good for us at the same time. So I wanted to explore those cycles, but I built these three women as products of their time period. Sabine comes from 16th century Spain at a point where she does not realize she is gay until she is enlightened, until somebody comes to her and is like, you should not be this miserable. You do not need to be this miserable, because at the time period she's living in, her definition of freedom is not freedom to love who you want to love and live how you want to live. Her definition of freedom is, I got to get out of this town.
Right.
I got to level up in some way. And then she does level up, and she realizes she's still not happy. So she tries to level up in a different way, and she realizes she's still not happy. And it takes realizing, oh, this is not the life that has been modeled for her, is not the life she actually wants. Charlotte is from Bridgerton era England, essentially, and she is existing in a time period where she knows she's gay, and her family has figured it out, and they essentially are shipping her to London to learn how to play straight. So that's a different dynamic. Alice, she's our modern day protagonist. She's been out since she was 14. That is not her quandary with herself, because I wanted to include that because sometimes it's not.
Right.
Like sometimes our gender and sexuality or identity are huge, and sometimes they're small. Sometimes they're not the defining thing about us. Sometimes we don't want it to be the only thing that people perceive. So Alice's quandary is a bit more existential, but I wanted to situate each one of them in their time and in their place, and then look at the cycle that they needed to get out of. It's also important to know that like how I write, I like to joke that this is 3 novellas in a trench coat, because this is 3 women's stories.
Yes.
These are 3 female narrators, and I want you to pay attention. By the way, this is spoiler-free chat. Don't worry, I'm not going to spoil anything. So if I tell you, it's a thing I would say to you before you have ever picked this book up. These are 3 women's stories told from them, not in first person, but this is not omniscient. Please pay attention to who is telling what part of the story. These are not reliable narrators. There is no such thing as a reliable narrator in fiction. That's not how it works. And so like, please pay attention to that. But these three women, you experience the story in narrative order, right? Present day, past, present day, switch character, etc. But I write the story in chronological order. So I figure out how I want the book to look for all of you, and then I break it out by character and timeline so that I have every one of the three women from the moment we meet them to the moment we leave them. And then I write each character in its entirety so that I hold the voice and the evolution of the voice over time, because one of the nuances of these characters is that they die inside. Over time. They have an existential decay that happens as the humanity crumbles in them. It's a little bit like a spiritual dementia. They're not always aware that it's happening, and it's entirely individual. So for some characters, it takes days. For some characters, it takes decades, and for some characters, it takes centuries.
Right.
So I wanted to build with that in mind so that I could chart not only their arc as people, but then their descent as predators.
Fascinating. I had another question, but now I want to ask you this other thing. How long do you sit with each character? Like, what's the process in terms of time?
I brainstorm the whole book for about a year before I will ever start drafting it. So thinking, and I don't mean brainstorm as like, it's in my head. I mean sitting down every day, building scenes, building each and every one of the, say, 300 scenes that build a book like this. By the time I sit down to actually draft the book, I know every single beat of every single scene. That is a mental health issue. That is not a craft. I want to be real clear, okay? I am a neurotic and anxious individual. This brings me comfort. I used to be, when I first started out, I need to know like 8 to 10. 8 to 10 plot points between the beginning and the end, and it was enough. Now, I need like ironclad certainty that the story has enough meat, that I am excited by it, that I know everything that happens. So the brainstorming is my joy. For that year, I am sitting down having a dialogue with myself on the daily, playing Choose Your Own Adventure, how does the coolest way to get from A to B in each scene. And then when I'm writing each of the three women, I am not allowed to write anyone else. So it's unbroken. So it doesn't matter how excited I am by some chapter that's going to come up in Charlotte's perspective. I started with Sabine, and then I went to Charlotte, and then I went to Alice, and I had to hold each one in order to feel like they were cohesive unto themselves.
I got you. Yeah.
It's messy.
But world building is so important in general, but in genre fiction in particular, and genre fiction that is so expansive, like this book that takes place across centuries, so it makes sense that you sat with each character because their voices are so individually strong, and then it's interesting to read about them from the other character's perspective. You're like hearing like, this is how I feel about myself, and then the next person is like, absolutely not.
I mean, and that's like one of my little love nods to Anne Rice, which is that I loved that she would do that. You'd read a whole book that's like Louis being like, here's what went down. And you get to the next book and Lestat's like, no. Because that's
definitely different.
That's how reality is, though. And I want my characters to feel like believable, real people. That's always been my goal, is that I want them to read like somebody that you mourn when you have to put the book down because you believe they still exist and you simply haven't been allowed to continue with them. I don't want their existence to feel contingent upon your engagement with them. So I want them to feel like they're present. But the thing about it is, like, you have friends or family, you all remember something differently. You all notice things differently. And that's always a craft advice thing that I give when people are writing genre, is like, pay attention to whose point of view a scene is in. And I always use the example of like Kel and Lila from Shades of Magic. When they go to Red London, that's a place Kel has been every day of his life, and it's a place Lila has never seen before. They should not be noticing the same things in those scenes. That's how I kind of choose whose scene to hold. In this book, it's a little different. I choose my handoff moments at like moments where the humanity erodes and therefore the character becomes a little more opaque, and I don't want you inside their head. But like in general, I'm always like, who's in this scene that has the most interesting perspective for the reader when it comes to learning about the scene?
So to that end, I mean, you write really strong characters, but also the setting is very vibrant. The settings, there's so many different settings, right? And so it makes sense now that you've revealed that you've spent 365 days. going through and building out a world, which sounds amazing. And so could you walk us through the process of sort of thinking about setting as well? Because there's so many, they're homes, they're countryside, rural, city, there's so many different...
I mean, setting is a character. Yeah. Setting is atmosphere. Like, setting is... The way I always I'm the kind of writer who a movie plays in my head, and then my goal is to put the words down on paper so that the exact same movie plays in your head. And that means not only looking at the action of a scene, but the way we move through it, the almost is there Vaseline on the lens sense, right? Is something feeling like memory, or is it feeling present? I want you to have a color palette in your mind. I want you to have a score. I want you to have all the components you need for that. And so for me, some of that comes from my background in poetry. I'm very, very aware of how I want sentences to be structured. There's a melancholic rhythm to a lot of this book that I want it to feel a little hypnotic, so that I can then jar you when it breaks. I also decided to do this thing with time because I'm covering so much of it, and I didn't want it to feel metronomic. What I do is I basically have a set piece that's a chunky set piece that tells you a lot, that's very defining, and then time slides for the character. So you'll have say 25 pages that is a single set piece that tells you everything, and then the next 25 years will be one page. Because I thought that's how time would work for somebody living over that time, is that seasons melt, right? Time blurs. I mean, that's an Addie LaRue quote, blink and the years fall away like leaves. It's just this sense of how time works for these characters. And so I just remember, especially with Sabine, because we're with her for the longest amount of time, historically, because she's kind of our anchor. There's nothing that happens in this book without her happening. And so as we follow her, she just feels time differently. Yeah. So I would try to treat the interstitial time as almost a poem, because I would limit it to a page, and each sentence on each line would kind of feel like it's taking you through a season or a year or a moment. So that's the structural nuance of it. And then I gave each of the three women linguistic quirks. So for instance, Sabine, our big bad, our villain, she's like Lestat meets Villanelle from Killing Eve, right? But she's styled like Florence Welch from Florence and the Machine. If you want a visual in your mind, I stole Florence's face. I was well, I saw her in concert in 2019, and I had that moment where I was oh, you're not a human. In the best way of there's a comic book series called The Wicked and the Divine, which the idea behind it, right, is that all of these really powerful kind of cult personality pop stars and rock stars are just reincarnated gods, and that they're feeding on the energy in that way. And also it's having seen Sinners 5 times, right? Ooh. Where you're music elevates you into this godly sphere, into this, monstrous, magical place. I wanted to have Sabine feel mythic in that way. So yeah, she's Florence visually, more personality, Villanelle. But yeah, with her, she's not deeply emotive. No. She was a practical and pragmatic human who was always insatiable. And so when she becomes a vampire, she doesn't suddenly grow morals, right? She's really methodical, she eats because she's hungry, right? Whereas Charlotte comes along, my kind of English Rose, not exactly, but she's of this time period where everything is about feelings. Everything is about feeling everything and thinking about everything and how it feels. And one of the first things she says to Sabine is what do you think we're taking from people when we drink from them? Is it just blood? Is it their heart? Is it their life? Is it their soul? She's really thinking about it. And she's been a vampire for 24 hours, right? And Sabine's I have no idea. Sabine has been a vampire for 200 years. She's I don't know. Does it matter? Because it doesn't matter to Sabine. So her style of narration reflects that. Not a huge amount of internality happening, very practical. Poetic in that it's historical, but not pretty to the point. Charlotte, deep introspection, deep feeling for every line of dialogue. Alice was the most fun because Alice has severe ADHD. And so Alice is essentially a continuing sequence of parenthetical notation. As she moves through a scene, gets distracted, sidebar, 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 and then works back to the point of the scene. So they're constructed to feel of their time. And the other fun thing about Alice, which was tricky, she's the only one that has pop culture. The other two predate vampiric pop culture references, so I had to figure out a way to manage Alice because it would have felt really weird and contrived for her to be like, but what's a vampire? Like she grew up on Twilight, like,
right.
you know?
Right.
And she's mortified by it. Like she has this amazing, I say amazing because it's how I would react, cognitive dissonance. Because she's like, okay. Like, I am real. And like that thing, like pop culture of like media, of like, you know, bad TV and good books, not real. But what that is happening here, so how either I'm losing my mind or something is happening and I don't understand. And she's constantly at war. Like, she doesn't say the word. The word vampire, I think, is used once in the entire book. She does not say it because if she says it, she might as well just like...
A human says it.
A human says it, yeah. A human says it. And Hector might say it one time in his list of things they've been called. I don't think he does even. I genuinely think a human says it one time, which is totally intentional. So all of those come into like building each of the three young women. And then they have a soundtrack. They have a score or music or something that becomes my like shortcut when I'm in their head.
Yes. I love it when poets write fiction. It's one of my favorite things, and you can always tell when someone has been a poet because there is such an attention to diction, to detail. Like, every word always counts. Yeah. But yeah, there would just be moments where I'm like, oh.
Well, and I read, you read it out loud is the thing, right? Like I want all my books to feel a little bit like an oral story. Like, I remember when I first brought this idea to my editor and I was like, I kind of want to write an epic poem. And she was like, please don't. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna format it like fiction, but I want, if you were to read any paragraph of it, I want that slight hypnotic cadence that comes with poetry. I mean, there's a poem at the beginning of this book. Like, I am not shying away from the poetic in this, but I definitely wanted to have the Gothic romanticism, and I just want sentences to taste a really specific way.
Ooh, I love that. Speaking of the poem that, you know, greets us at the beginning of the text, can we talk a bit about the title?
Sure.
So this phrase talking about midnight soil and feral roses that bloom from midnight soil is a refrain throughout the novel. And so could you say more about sort of that soil is important?
Yeah, I mean, burial is important, like death and rebirth. The poem came first.
Okay.
So I don't really know why. I really am a deep control freak when it comes to my work, and so when something surprises me, I'm always like, But I just know that when I was planning the story in its very early stages back in like 2021, I became fixated with writing this 4 lines. And I don't really know why. And I think now in retrospect I do, which is that I wanted an extended metaphor that would allow me to play with without using the word vampire, but would give me like an aesthetic sensibility for my monsters, and would also suggest a larger playing field. So the idea of the garden, and also the idea of like, this probably goes into wanting to not like, I did not want my queer women to feel in any way unnatural. And so I wanted to use a metaphor that was deeply of the natural world. They do not see themselves as monsters. They see themselves as like one of the highest forms of the natural order, right? The hardiest rose in the garden, you know? And I've loved roses all my life. Like, my family has always grown them. They're just like, they are, I mean, and if you think about what a rose is, it's perfect. It has all the components of a vampire. It has teeth, right? It has sharpness and softness, and it has resilience. And I'll look at a rose that's like 500 years old, and it's, you know, it's grown. And you're like, how is a small plant so ferocious and so determined? Like, their root systems can split soil, can split sidewalks, right? Like, they're incredibly resilient things. And I just like the idea of the self-referential in that way, that I thought, given my vampires, they would like to think of themselves as roses. And I think it immediately set the stage of like a natural, organic, beautiful, but predatory space. And I just remember walking in Brooklyn when I was trying to turn over the last 2 lines of the poem. The poem is, bury my bones in the midnight soil, plant them shallow and water them deep, and in my place will grow a feral rose, soft red petals hiding sharp white teeth. And that soft red petals hiding sharp white teeth was really the point of it. But I liked this idea of growing wild, and it was something I found myself talking about just in my own craft, talking about roots, talking about even the way I thought about Addie in retrospect, was that the wake of Addie was one of the worst depressive episodes of my life, professional, like my adulthood. My adulthood and my professional life are exactly lined up. Like I started writing professionally when I was 19, so like I do associate the two. And the wake of Addie, the way I described it to everyone in my life was that there was an empty plot, that I had excavated Addie and it had left a barren hole, and that I was throwing seeds into this plot, hoping something would take root, and nothing would, because that's not how creativity works. You can't force something, especially when the soil is not have the right nutrients. So the metaphor kind of was already in my mind in the wake of Addie. And then the way I described it is like one day after I gave up trying to grow something in this plot, and I just accepted that there would be this grave in my head, something started growing up on its own, something I hadn't consciously planted, something that I obviously had wanted to write for a really long time, and almost felt like, if you think about extending the metaphor even further, like it came up from beneath where Addie had been, which means it had come from something older. It had been there before. So I started asking myself, like, what was there? And why am I still captivated by this? And so that's where the queerness and the vampires and this desire to write something that teenage me would have just been feral for comes from.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the Interview with a Vampire, the film came out when I was in ninth grade, and I was there at the movie theater. Like, oh yeah, I'm 17.
Oh,
I was not.
I own that. I own that DVD. I watched that DVD
so
continuously, and then the show happened, and I was like, oh, I see we're leveling up, right? Because that show took subtext and made it text. That show was like, oh, like hold my beer, right? That show, phenomenal. But yes, these like, every time I would work on an adaptation for one of my books, everything came back to Interview with a Vampire. I want it to feel like the kind of movie that you will just stop what you're doing and watch. And for me, that was like one of those films, right?
Absolutely.
And it's wicked. It's like, it's got such teeth. And the ending, like you think it's gonna resolve one way, and then the last shot is something else. And I was like, yes, it's like that.
Edge of your seat. Yeah, well, you're for sure bringing this kind of quality to your work. Oh, I can't wait for everybody to read it. I want to go back to what you were saying about how the vampires understand themselves to be kind of the apex of creation in some way. Since we're in a church, I'm just thinking about, we can talk about Judeo-Christian kind of mythology, right? That like humans are supposed to be just a little bit lower than the angels, right? And it's that these vampires are like, but actually.
I know. Higher life form.
Higher,
Yeah.
But they don't think of themselves as monsters, but they're doing some monstrous stuff.
Oh, of course they are. But I would argue, and this is kind of a theme across all my books, so are humans. Like there's nothing that the vampires do in this book that humans haven't done. And like a lot of... Okay, so there's a third reason I wanted to write these female vampires, right? This is not a love story. I want to be real clear. I saw one person online be like, this new romantasy, and I was like, 'tis not. 'Tis not. Please go in with your proper expectation set. This is as much a horror as it is a love story. This is a falling out of love story. This is a collateral damage story. I say that to say, this book is about violence. Specifically, though, this book is about the fact that certain bodies move through the world and by their very nature incite and invite violence, right? Whether they're queer bodies, whether they're brown bodies, whether they simply don't conform in some way to this very narrow definition of who gets to move through the world without fear, right? You walk out your house and you are immediately in danger. You are prey in a predatory world. And so one of the reasons that I wanted to do vampires specifically for these women is because I thought that the greatest form of liberation for them would be to no longer be afraid of the world in which they inhabit. And there's a moment in the book where Alice needs to eat somebody, right, as you do. And she puts herself in a situation, she's 18, right? She puts herself in a situation that has historically always been dangerous. for young women. And sure enough, as this situation progresses, she immediately feels the recoil of her 18 years of conditioning of like, oh no, I'm scared. And then she has the realization. And up to this moment, it's been pretty shit being a vampire for Alice. Like, it's not a great 48 hours, right? But in this moment, she realizes, oh, I don't have to be afraid. He does. And it tells you how broken the world is that, I cannot think of a better form of liberation than to go from being prey to being predator. So yes, this book is full of predators, but they are predators that have been made that way by being treated like prey for their entire lives. And is that monstrous, or is that just recompense? You know?
I think that's one of the reasons why I like to read vampire fiction that is not sort of the typical, classical, Dracula, poor white womanhood, like, being attacked, right? Things where folks who would be powerless actually step into power. It's a lot more interesting.
It's honestly empowering. I mean, like, it is, and I think that anyone who has been made to feel small or feel scared, I truly can't think of something more intoxicating than the idea of never having to be scared of that again. And so I wanted to let those women be monstrous in ways that the world had been monstrous to them. And I think, so empathy is super important, right? Like, likability is bullshit. Likability is, I feel very bad swearing in church. I just feel like something's gonna happen. I don't know. I'm a gay pagan in church. It's a very uncomfortable place for me. Likability is kind of bullshit. Relatability is important, right? Relatability, how we connect with characters, how we understand them. And what it comes down to, and I learned this from Vicious, it's not what we do, it's why we do it. Because my goal with Vicious, which was my first adult novel, was to see if I could make two men horrible. Like, really bad people doing really bad things, but make you root for one of the two. And what you discover then is that we don't actually judge people based on what they do. We judge people based on why they do it. So if we can understand the why behind somebody's actions, then we can support them.
Right.
But I have also learned a caveat, and that is catharsis. Sabine is catharsis. Catharsis is what happens when you don't have to relate to a character, but you like to live vicariously through their actions. And catharsis is delicious, right? And catharsis is what happens from being made to feel certain ways and then getting to watch people act out. And we can talk about the fact that like fantasy and science fiction are often proving grounds for hope, right? We get to empower and enable people that don't necessarily feel empowered and enabled in reality. It becomes a one step remove where we get to say, okay, but for a little while, can you imagine what it would feel like to hunt an abuser down, right? Can you imagine what that would feel like to go for a run at night? And not have to, or to not have to text your friends your location before going on a date, to not have to have your location on at all times, like tiny little things, to be able to set every one of those little weights down, right?
Yeah.
So
there aren't those fears, but there are other fears that you explore, which I think is really interesting. So could you say a little bit about that?
I mean, the world is a dangerous place. Like, anytime you have strength, you have to have weakness. There has to be some form of balance. And so, I mean, I like creating rules. There are still rules. Vampires have rules. Like, I took some and I left some and I made some new ones because I like to have my rule system be really logical. But obviously, like, if the heart is destroyed, they're destroyed. The heart stays mortal. Like, that made sense to me existentially in terms of the disintegrating humanity, and it made sense to me in the literal. I was like, okay, that seems like a fair rule, right? Not being able to set foot in churches and stuff, I was like, get rid of that. But like, places where death resides, like graves, that makes sense. Death calls death down. So logic systems prevail for me when I'm designing stories. I think though that like one of the things that's dangerous for my vampires, because the question becomes, why aren't there more? Right? That's a logic question you ask at the beginning of building something. And I was like, well, something must be taking them out. We have external force or internal force. External force would be like a vampire hunter. Sure, that's fun, but it doesn't really explain like the whole bulk.
Right.
So let's look at internal force. Internal force, the idea that as their humanity decays, so does their self-preservation. We become reckless when we think we're the biggest monster in the garden, right? We become more interested in our own entertainment than in our safety. So weirdly, yeah, you get to go from being prey to being predator, but if you stay predator long enough, you forget what it was like to be prey and you become a little bit self-destructive. So there are dangers.
Yeah.
The other danger is relationships. They're
That's
still
what
dangerous.
I want to talk about.
They're
Yes, those
still
are the
dangerous.
dangers. Yes.
Love is still dangerous. Love is dangerous. Being loved is dangerous. Falling in and out of love is dangerous. Loving a version of somebody that doesn't exist anymore is dangerous. Toxic ex-girlfriend in this book, super dangerous.
The
it
most
turns
toxic
out.
ex-girlfriend.
Like toxic ex-girlfriend in this book, way dangerous. Yeah, I think there's a lot of forms of danger. Complicity is dangerous. Fear of loneliness. The need to be loved. Like these things which are strengths can become weaknesses in an instant.
Yeah.
And I think when you're immortals, it's a lonelier life, and so you have fewer people and you hold to those people a lot tighter. And then again, if it's a bad relationship or a dangerous relationship, an unhealthy relationship, your ex has teeth. Like your ex might be a little dangerous. So yeah, I think there are always risks.
Yeah.
There's always risk. There's another thing in this which is like, I talked a little about complicity, or mentioned complicity, which is I love to have a moral or ethical dilemma in a book, just mix it up a little bit. And in this one, the vampires realize that they don't actually need to feed. And this is where this dilemma comes in. They hunger. Every moment of every day they are hungry. And the moment they stop feeding, the hunger returns. But it is almost impossible, technically, for a vampire to starve. So it's a self-soothing technique, but it's not actually that necessary. I think if they ate every 10 years, they'd probably be fine. But imagine being so devastated. I know, right? Sad life, though. Sad. But here's where it becomes their comfort more important than other people's safety. So how do you see yourself as a good person when you are still making the decision to prioritize your own indulgence or your I can't say the word satiety, your satiatedness.
Yes.
I can see it written, and I can never pronounce it out loud, over someone else's safety, right? So I like to throw that in there as well as a little bit of reminder that we are complicit in the damage that we do to others. And we have to either accept that, or we have to find a way to convince ourselves that we're not hurting people.
Or that it doesn't matter.
Yeah, or it doesn't, or you're Sabine and you're like, okay, well, needs must.
I think we're coming up on, thank you for that. Can we get a round of applause?
Oh, yeah.
That was great. So we have audience questions that were sent in beforehand.
Yeah.
Super awesome. And so we're going to ask
Let's
a few.
do it.
All right.
We might have gotten to a couple of them in context, but yeah.
Okay. Do you think magic should always come with a cost? Why or why not?
Absolutely. I think you have to have a balance, right? It's also what gives it meaning. I really struggle with characters in comics like Superman, because it doesn't actually seem like there's a blowback, right? It doesn't seem like there's a balance of scales, which is but if you look at the Flash passes out from lack of calories after a certain point, right? He burns through his reserves. I think the balance is what creates stakes, pun intended. I think that we need stakes, right? You need investment. You need there to be some way to balance the scales of power. Yeah. Because magic, or any form of power, superpowers, magic, vampires, any form of supernatural power needs to come at a cost, whether it's internal or external, or else what matters? Because if that doesn't matter, then nothing matters, and if nothing matters, then why should I care?
Right.
Right?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. There has to be a logic to the world building.
It can't be inexhaustible. So the rule, with Shades of Magic, the magic is basically inexhaustible, the people aren't. Right? So either your source has to be exhaustible, or your vessel has to be exhaustible, but something has to break under enough pressure.
To make it interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Someone writes, one of my favorite things about your characters is that they can be distilled to a question and discussion about our humanity. And we've talked a little bit about this. Who we are if we can't be remembered, can't feel pain, heal at the speed of light, can't destroy with the touch of a hand. How do you decide which aspects of a person, and concomitantly humanity, come on, question, to explore? Are there other hallmarks of humanity that you want to explore in the future?
Ooh, I mean, yeah, in Addie LaRue, the thing I wanted to explore was legacy and memory. In this, it's hunger. I'm really interested in like how you measure a life and whether it needs to have an impact on other people. Like, does it need to have scale to matter? And I think I like the idea that I like exploring a question for which the answer is different depending on the person. I'm not really interested in universals, but I am really interested in like what keeps us going. And I use Addie LaRue as an example. When I first started writing Addie, I wrote her as a classic immortal, which is to say she was 300 years old and she was really tired. But I actually started realizing there was a flaw in that immediately because I've yet to encounter an immortal that could not end themselves somehow. And Addie has a really easy way out. She literally just has to put up a hand and be like, I don't want to do it anymore. So apathy for immortals, to me, is a flawed idea. I don't buy it. And so I needed for her, she had to be radically curious and defiantly optimistic instead. She had to, but it started as spite. Like, she started as like, I will not give you my soul, I will spite the devil. And then you realize that spite, like anger, burns out, and hope is a thing that is a little more sustaining. So I like asking a question and letting it differ based on the character. Spite can drive us, hope can drive us, hunger can drive us, love can drive us. I'm less interested in love. I think I'm less interested in love because every time there is a romance in a book, every other dynamic gets downgraded.
Ooh.
And I am as interested in friend and family and foe as I am in love. So for me, like, love is a really nice reward, but love will never be the driving force of any of my books, only because I want it to coexist on the page with other things, and it doesn't seem to quite be able to in readers' estimations right now, which is the reason most of my books don't prioritize romance. This weirdly has more love in it than most of my books, but in a bad way. In a bad way. And the thing I always come back to is actually a line in Addie that is kind of the informing line for this book, which is Addie is with Luke for 300 years, and at one point, they have a long situationship. And at one point when they are romantically entwined, Addie says to Luke, if you loved me, you would let me go. And Luke says, it is because I love you that I won't. And Addie says, then that's not love, that's possession. And I would argue that is real the vibe here.
Very much so. Very much so. Here's a craft question.
Ooh.
How do you choose the names of the characters in your books? Has a main character ever started as one name and you felt it wasn't right and changed it?
Okay, so I am, as I've said, really neurotic, really controlling, plan everything meticulously, like to play God in my little world. Not the big God or whatever, but little God, little G, right? And names are the one place that it's just weird vibes. Remember how I was like, I like things to taste a certain way, like words to taste a certain way in my mouth? I'm the same way with names. I need them to taste. And I cannot start writing a character until they have their name. I cannot give them a placeholder name that I change out later. The name can never change. My debut novel, The Near Witch, came out, it has two characters, one named Lexi and one named Cole. And it came out, and I found out right before it went to print that another book was coming out that week that had two characters named Lexi and Cole. And I had the time to change my characters' names if I wanted to, and I was like, how could I do that? Like, I've written these people. Names are important, whether we choose them for ourselves, whether they're nicknames, whether we... And the example I like to give is, I did not have a name for the first couple weeks that I was born. Like, my parents left it blank and went back. They wanted to live with me.
Oh, okay.
They wanted to vibe it out for a little while.
Like, let's see.
And see what my personality was. They were like, how are we supposed to name a person that doesn't exist yet? What if it doesn't fit? And they were choosing between two names. They were choosing between Samantha and Victoria.
Okay.
And I am such a Victoria that I'm really glad they waited. But I kind of do that. I hold characters and I toy with names, but once the name is set, I don't care. Like, people are like, oh, you have an Alice in this book, and that's a character from Trudging. I'm like, I don't care. I don't care if that was, you could tell me that name has been used 150 times this year and they're all vampires. I don't care. Like, that's her name.
Right.
So names to me are sacred.
Yes. Staying on the subject of naming.
Yeah.
Another question is, you put so much of yourself into creating stories and working your craft. How much input do you have when it comes to the titles of your books and the cover art? Always a good question for authors.
I know, that's a great question. More than I used to have.
Okay.
And it's publisher specific. I don't have the same amount of control with everything. I am at the point in my career where I have quite a lot. Titles are a group effort. I've gotten very lucky that, like, my long titles I've gotten to keep. I have fought for them. The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue was always that. Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil was always that. A Darker Shade of Magic, 75th title. Like, I have such a weird relationship with titles, too, because I keep choosing words that no one can spell, apparently. The number of people who are like, I love your book, Viscous. It's my favorite book. I'm like, well...
Not Viscous.
Well, and the problem was the original title for A Darker Shade of Magic, this is about to be like a Zen koan for you, right, was Traveler. Because originally that's what I called the Antari magicians in it, were travelers, because they could move between worlds. Here's the problem. I am a British-American author writing a British set book, but for an American publisher. Does Traveler have one L or two L's? Because the answer is yes. That is the problem. And after about 3 months, my publisher was like, but hey, guess what? Please pick another word. And so, yeah, the Shades of Magic books have always been quite finicky. In general, though, I have a lot of control. I had a huge amount of control in this cover. I'm very passionate about it. It's in literal midnight colors. Like, I wanted a night-soaked garden. I wanted a departure, obviously, from my other books. I wanted a departure from Addie LaRue, and yet I kind of felt like there's a blue edition of Addie, and I was like, they sit nicely together. But I also just wanted it to be entirely itself. The original edition, the original version, I'm gonna get in trouble for saying this, I don't care. The original version of the cover that came in was red. Red like Rebecca, and red like Vampire. And I love it, and it might show up at some point in a paperback edition, but it was on the nose. Red Vampire book, how original. And like, it came down to 2 covers. It came down to the red iteration of this. And this felt special. This felt special and like, and intricate and simple and gothic and timeless, and that's what I wanted. There's a lot of cooks in the kitchen when it comes to covers and titles. Also, the main complicating factor is that my undergraduate degree is in book design. And so it is a battle. I tell my publishers up front, I'm like, guess what? I'm going to be great at editing. I'm going to be such a team player. Prepare for me to get real sassy. Like, when the covers come in, when the titles come in, I am going to be an asshole about font. I'm going to be an asshole about kerning. I'm going to be an asshole about opacity. I want all of it a very, very specific way. But yeah, so I have a lot of say. Yeah.
Thanks to whoever asked that question. Great question.
Yeah.
On your Instagram, you've shared about your writing process and that you like to have a pretty fleshed out story before putting any pen to paper, which we've learned.
Which we discussed, yeah.
Given AI's influence on art and media and general consumer consumption habits, do you ever feel any pressure to produce faster? How do you balance that pressure with honoring your writing process? And do you think your answer would change if you were a newer author just starting out?
That is the key part of that question and why I bullet pointed it, because I am very glad I am not just starting out for so many reasons. I think I oscillate pretty wildly between real existential terror of knowing someone can feed all of my work into an AI and say, write me a book that sounds like V.E. Schwab wrote it, and it might do a decent job. But I also think it's a little uncanny valley, and I still think that like the soul is really the difference. Maybe AI will get to the point where that doesn't matter, but that's also like, that's not why I write. Like, you could make 100 mimics of me. It doesn't make me not exist. It might kill my sales, which would really suck. But it doesn't erase me. And I think it's really easy to get really scared about, as an artist, about generative AI. And I think you just have to remember that it's like the same thing as if I gave everyone in this room the same 2-sentence story prompt. We would have 800 different stories.
Absolutely.
Because perspective, nuance, empathy, like life experience, all of these things become things that you can't actually replicate in technology. It's why AI makes hands with like 6 fingers, and you're like, ah. I think there's like an artistic version of that. Even when AI gets good enough to make hands with 5 fingers, it's still gonna be like 5 index fingers. It's gonna be super weird, right? I think you can spend a lot of time being really scared about the art that other people are making or how they're making it, or you can work on your art. And I think at the end of the day, like, you have to work on your art. It's the same advice I give to someone who's like, I was writing a book and then I saw a deal announcement for a book that sounds just like mine. I'm like, it's not just like yours, I promise.
Yeah.
It's you read a 3-sentence pitch for a 400-page novel written by a stranger. Like, I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah.
Like, this book and Hungerstone came out in the same year and are both about queer feminist rage. And like, they're so different, and I obviously, and I love Hungerstone. Like, there is room for different stories. There is room for your story, and whether it's another human or an AI is not going to erase the fact that you can write yours.
That part. In 2005, 2 vampire novels came out that were about vampires in the Pacific Northwest. One was called Twilight by Stephanie Meyer, and one was called Fledgling by Octavia Butler.
Oh.
Right? They're not the same book. Having read them both, right? One has sparkly vampires and one doesn't. Right? So,
real main difference right there.
Yeah. What's for you is for you. Your process is your process. Even if it's set in the same place and concerns some of the same questions, it's not the same.
One of my favorite exercises is to, like, in a creative writing workshop, give everyone the exact same pitch. Because, like, it's wild. Nothing looks the same. Nothing reads the same. Nothing feels the same. Only you can write the version of the story that you will write. And it's the same way as, like, as an author, we control half of the experience. And the reader controls the other half of the experience. And we cannot dictate anything about who any of you are or where you're at in your life or what you bring to the page. We control what we bring to the page. So even when you're working on a story, you're not going to control the context in which that story is being read or who reads it. So it's like you start to make that problem smaller in your mind. You start to worry less about it when you realize it's not 95% of the challenge, it's 5% of the challenge.
Yes. ER, how are we doing on time? Because I have some other great questions. 25?
Woo! Yeah, we got this.
All right. Okay. The entire time I was reading Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil, I was thinking to myself, this feels deeply personal. And then saw where you said that you did, in fact, put a lot of yourself into this one. How hard was it to put out something so personal into the world?
Ooh, harder than I thought it would be. Like, I did this with Henry and Addie, and it was one character, and I was like, oh no. Because writing, it's this weird paradox. In order to write deeply, authentically, creatively, you have to take off all of your armor. You have to be real honest with yourself. If you cannot be very frank with yourself, you cannot write authentically well. If you're not being honest with yourself, if you're hiding from yourself in any way, it's going to show up on the page, right? So you have to strip it all off in order to write. And then somehow, between the writing and the publishing, you got to put all the armor back on. And I think I feel like a body that is caught in the hallway with half my armor on. Like, I am never going to get enough armor on for this book. I am learning it very quickly. This one's a little too personal. And so it feels like if when someone doesn't like it, it feels like they don't like me. And I think for so long it was like I didn't feel feminine enough, or I didn't feel queer enough, or I didn't feel all these things that it can feel like I'm back 10 years ago. Like, being presumed straight, or like people feeling like it's not my story or it's not my space, and it scares me and it's hard. I think you either get much better than I am at not being online, or you realize, and I think this is something I have gotten better at, which is that if you're lucky enough to have the luxury of people for whom a book is the book, for whom they needed the book, for whom they saw themselves in the book, it becomes a lot easier to let go of the people who didn't see themselves in the book, for whom it wasn't the book. Because there's so many books out there, they're gonna find the book for them.
Right.
I am not in the business of writing books for everyone. I don't think there is a business of writing books for everyone, but I think I really am not. I appear to be a very polarizing author. I never really thought about myself this way, but I think you either really like my books or you really do not like my books. And I think I've realized I'm okay with that because I would rather you feel strongly one way or another than feel like, oh, just kind of middle of the road about it.
Yes.
I also think like I have made peace with the kind of stories that I tell, which is to say I really want more than anything else for the story to stick with you after you're done reading. I don't expect that of all books. Like I read 100, 125 books a year, right? I want 115 of them to just be fun. I do not want 115 books to try and get in my head and under my skin and change me in any way. That would be really exhausting.
It would be.
But I do want, say, 10 books a year to ask something of me in return and to stick with me after I put them down. And those are the kind of books I want to write. And I think I have to acknowledge that those are the kind of books I want to write, not the 115. And the 115 tend to have a wider appeal because they're more middle of the road. They ask less of you. They're like reality television, right? Like they're like a comfort watch. Like maybe my books can become comfort reads for some people, but I really want them to like be a little haunting in that I want them to haunt you. I want you to think about I do. I want them to like, I want you to think about them 3 weeks or 3 months or 3 years after you finish. I want you to see something in the world that reminds you of something in one of, I want that. And I think it's because I care a lot about the characters. If you do not care about the characters the plot is happening to, you don't really stick with the book. Like the book doesn't stick with you. So yeah, it's really hard. This is the most personal book I've ever written. As I said, these 3 women represent my own coming out journey. This book represents like 15 years of reckoning with myself and in publishing. To this day, it is the first book I will get a tattoo for, which is a lot for me because this is book 25. So for 24 books, I have not gotten a tattoo. But the reason is that the writing of this book has nothing to do with the reception. The writing of this book helped me take up space in my own story, not just in their story. And I think that that's why it's so scary to share. Whenever someone would bring an arc up to me before the book came out, I would like do this thing that I can only describe as trying to put it back behind my ribs. Like I would take the arc and then I would push it against my chest as if my rib cage would part and allow it back in, right? Where it would be safe. And now I can't really do that. Also, sidebar, did any of you get an arc? Okay, I changed the ending. Yeah, I did. I just want I rewrote the last 5 sentences, the 6 hours before it went to print.
Yeah,
so just a fun thing. But yeah, I can't pull it back into my chest anymore, and I just have to live with it being out in the world. I know.
Yes, okay. I'm going to read the last 5. Okay. I'm stressed. All right.
Yeah. I didn't change the plot. I just changed the poetry.
Okay. All right. All right. Okay.
JK, they all live happily ever after. New ending.
Yeah.
Little polyamorous.
I mean, hey.
Triangle.
To get back to, actually, let me.
I'm going on like 5 hours of sleep right now, and this is day 13 of tour.
You're doing so good.
We're trying.
And I know you have to get on a plane.
I got to get on a plane to London right after this, so it's great. I know. There's nowhere I'd rather be.
Folks want to know, will you write any more vampire novels and expand the Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil universe?
Here's what I'll say. I like to think of Addie and Bones as existing in the same world. There is a very tiny cameo. Yeah, okay. So, if this is the garden, and in the garden we have old gods, and we have vampires, and these exist in the same garden. I spend a lot of time thinking about what else grows in the garden, right? So that is to say, every book that I've written in the garden, so far, these two, they're standalones. And I anticipate that if I were to do another one, that would continue. But, maybe the weeds and the roots begin to grow together a little bit.
Ooh, tantalizing possibilities. Okay. All right. I know that we probably have some burgeoning writers in the room. Any writers? We have any
Raise your
writers here?
hand.
Come on, writers.
Yeah.
Don't be shy. You just have to write to be a writer.
Exactly.
I didn't ask if you were published. You just have to write. That makes you a writer. Do you have any tips on embracing the imperfection that comes with getting started / writing a first draft, AKA a shitty first draft?
First drafts. Here's the thing you have to realize about a first draft. I am someone who has to white knuckle first drafts. I do not enjoy the controlled failure of it, because that's what it is. You have an idea in your head, and the idea in your head is perfect because it does not exist. It is an idea, and ideas get to be perfect. The act of writing them down on paper is the act of making them imperfect, and they will never be perfect again. The first hurdle is acknowledging that. The second is acknowledging that the first draft is the farthest the story will ever be from what was in your head. That is also very demoralizing. The act of revision is the act of shrinking the gap between the thing that now exists in the world and the thing that was in your head. Acknowledge that. That is what the revision is for. If you never get it down on paper, you cannot bring it back to yourself, but it will be the farthest from you. So I think acknowledging that, and then acknowledging that if 10,000 people want to write a book, 1,000 people will start and 10 will finish.
Ooh.
Those are rough metrics.
Yeah.
So you need to be one of the 10 that finishes. And in order to be one of the 10 that finishes, you have to not be distracted by the shiny new idea, first of all. For those who don't know, shiny new idea is a trademark concept. Everyone in publishing knows it. And essentially is what happens anywhere between 10 and 30% of the way into a project. The thing you're working on becomes dull, and you get a shiny new idea. Your brain is lying. Here's what's actually happening. The thing you are working on is becoming familiar to you, because it must become familiar to you in order for you to finish it, in order for you to engage with it meaningfully. It must lose its shine and its novelty. The shiny new idea is come work on me instead. Abandon ship, go over here. And if you do that, the entire cycle will repeat itself, 10% to 30% into the shiny new idea. It will become dull, and this will go on forever, and you will never finish anything. And you want to be one of the 10 that finishes. And so my best advice is find an ending that excites you. Find an ending that excites you. It does not have to become the finished ending. Right? Find an ending that excites you, because on good days it will give you momentum, on bad days it will keep you from quitting, but most importantly, writing a story is a mammoth task. And if you do not know where you are going, it is like standing at the edge of a desert. Of course you are daunted by those piles of sand. If you have an ending that excites you, you are standing at the edge of a football field. It is still quite a lot of space, but you can see the other side. And if you get stuck, now you can say, what's one thing I want to happen between me and the edge of the football field? And you can drop a cone. And if you're still stuck, you can say, what's one thing I want to have happen between me and the cone? And you can drop another cone. And you can drop as many things as you need to make the distance seem manageable. But you must get to the other side before anything else can happen.
The allure of the shiny new project.
Never do it. Oh, here's the thing I'm going to tell you.
Siren's call.
Here's the thing I'm going to tell you. If the shiny new idea is actually an idea worth telling, it will wait. If the shine wears off in the time you are neglecting it, it wasn't a good enough idea. Fighting words.
Fighting words. If Bury Our Bones was an album, what album would it be?
Oh, okay. I won't give the album, but I'll give the artist, mostly because I'm terrible at album names and I just am really bad at this. It would either be Florence and the Machine's latest, or it would be Kiki Rockwell. Kiki Rockwell's Madeline is a song that I played 750 times while writing this book, and I now can't listen to it, not because I don't love it, but because it makes me melancholic, because it makes me want to be writing my book again. But if you need one song to listen to get you in the mood for this book, it would be Madeline by Kiki Rockwell. If you want a playlist, I built one. It's actually 3 small playlists in a trench coat, and it gives you a main track for each of the 3 women and the rest of their soundtrack. So if you want to kind of get the vibe for whatever part of the story you're in, you can look up the whole soundtrack. Because music is so, like, music is where I get my ideas from. I hear
and there's
songs.
Lots of music.
There's so much
There's
music in this. There's so much music. Music is, I mean, that's why, like I say, when I saw Sinners for the first time and I walked out and I was like, again! And I just like immediately went back the next day because like, I will hear a song and think, I want to write something that makes me feel the way this song makes me feel. Like music holds me while I'm writing.
I got you. Okay. I'm going to read this question and I'm going to add something if I can. So, what's a book you read this year that you can't stop thinking about? I'm wondering if you have read one of the 10 that have stuck with you and moved you in a particular way.
I mean, The Buffalo Hunter, obviously, yeah. But honestly, Stephen Graham Jones, in my opinion, can do very little wrong. So that was one of my most surprising, because again, weirdly, kind of a vampire book, but also a you are what you eat vampire book, and it's so clever and so ambitious, and it deals with so many different kinds of storytelling nested together to such great effect. I think it's probably the best thing that I've read so far this year.
All right, pick it up. We've talked about this a little bit, but I'm interested to hear what you think. So this question is, you're primarily considered a fantasy/sci-fi author. Have you ever thought of writing in another genre, such as horror, which you say this is? What would you speak to that?
I think the only thing I'm not interested in is absolute realism. Because like my whole thesis, my whole premise is that I want to write magic and the supernatural in our world. So like if my 2 feet are on the ground right here and this is reality, and like 50 paces away is something like Tolkien, right? And I will only ever access Middle Earth through the pages of that book. I cannot visit it myself. That's why it's over there. And halfway between is like C.S. Lewis, who tells us somewhere in our house there's a wardrobe with no back. Portal fantasy starts in our world and then leaves. But I want to keep 1 foot in reality and 1 foot in magic and monsters. I want to invite that in. I want to convince the reader that it coexists with them in time and in space, and then it's then an art of noticing issue, because then you might have passed Addie on the street and forgotten her. You might have been into a coffee shop like Ezra's. Like you never, it creates doubt. And the thing is, to make you believe in magic, I don't actually have to make you believe in magic. I just have to sow a tiny seed of doubt in your reality. And then the what if can get in. And I'm really interested in what ifs. So I can't see myself writing absolute realism, because to me that's where the fun is. It's like, I always am like, but what if I added monsters?
We're so glad that you do.
The arbiter.
Yes, exactly. What is an aspect of the book or character on this tour that you want to talk about but you haven't been asked about yet?
Ooh, I feel like I have just been talking about everything about this book. I'm trying to think. We've been so thorough, loves. We've been so thorough. I think, the thing I really wanted to talk about was perspective reality, which we kind of touched on, which is that the 3 women at the heart of this book are inherently unreliable narrators. And I just want you to really remember that. Because some of them are more objective than others. I kind of want you to think about how we choose the parameters of story. Because when we talk about a story, we think of it as if there is the beginning and the end. But I've never actually seen that as my job. My job is to choose the point at which you get to enter the party and the point at which you have to leave the party. But the party keeps going. This book will not end where you think it's going to end.
No.
Just as it doesn't quite begin where someone would think it's supposed to begin. And everything like that is intentional. It's about a specific point of a specific story. It's not about the whole story. You have not been invited to everybody's whole story. I also, okay, here's something I'll say. There is a true love pairing in this book. They are my favorites. Their names are Matteo and Alessandro.
Oh,
okay?
yes.
They are.
Yes.
They are a model love story because there's consent.
Yes.
There's autonomy. There's respect. Their love story is so important that Sabine goes hunting for its equal in her own life.
Right.
But if anyone wanted to know my favorite character in the book, his name is Alessandro. So look for him.
Oh, I could see why.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
I'll also say this. There are only 2 moments in this book that made me cry. And very few people have guessed both of them. People usually guess one of them. It takes place in a garden at night in England with an elderly character.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah.
But no one has guessed the second one. And I'm like, what? I can't tell you. Okay. The second one, I can tell this in a way that won't spoil it, but I want you to think about it now while you read. Takes place at the top of a staircase outside of an apartment. Yeah.
Okay.
And a doorway.
Yeah.
So look for the 2 moments, because they're the only 2 that actually made me cry. I mean, I'm hoping there's more moments that make you cry. It's just those are the 2, as the maker, that made me very emotional.
I'm going to ask you one final question.
Oh, no. Okay. It's nerve-wracking. What's it going to be?
Which book that you've written is your favorite to recommend to people who have never read your works?
This is my favorite thing because there is not one answer. Because I like to think of my books as a train with many cars. And I'm always really curious. Whenever anyone asks me that for recommendation, I'm like, that presumes there's only one place to get on the train. My hope is that you stay on the train and you begin to wander between the cars, and I can tell you which cars sit nicest beside each other. Like if someone loves Addie, I'm like, this is your next one. If someone has never read me, I'm like, this is a great first one. If you are if you wish Professor X and Magneto had a toxic bromance in college, there's Vicious. If you love Avatar: The Last Airbender, there's a darker shade of magic, right? What you want from me depends on where you're at in your life and what you're looking for in a reading experience. If you want to be traumatized, it's This Savage Song in Our Dark Duet, which is a YA series. It's grim. So I like to say my 3 main entry points for readers are usually like Vicious, which is my starkest, briskest. It is a comic book without pictures. You want to read it in a day. You want it to move fast. That's your book. You want the start of a multi-book, multi-world adventure where you get to stay with characters for a really long time. That's Shades of Magic and Threads of Power. You want to feel things like grief and hope and sadness and beauty. You can choose Addie or Bones, but I would actually start with Bones because Bones is like if Addie and Vicious had a child. Which is funny because they exist at polar opposite ends of my readership spectrum. So I just apparently like pissing all my readers off because it's like, here, let me have the one from way over here and the one from way over here that has almost no cross-pollination whatsoever. My Vicious readers and my Addie readers do not tend to be the same reader. I love it if you are, but they do tend to be at opposite ends, and I'm like, here. This is not in the middle, by the way, it's just simultaneously at both ends.
Gotcha. Can we give you a round of applause?
Thank you, Hannah.
That was fun.
Thank you. And to Susanna. Also, I cannot wait for this book. Thank you.
So there's going to be a signing? Okay.
All right, real quick before everyone goes. First of all, thank you all. It has been probably like a hot minute. Actually, it's been since before COVID that the church has been this packed for an event where we have people standing up in the balcony and standing in the back. So thank you all so very much. I have notes from the parking and traffic committees. So, very important, because here's the thing. Claremont, it's controlled by this traffic light down here. So when it backs up, it's very, very difficult for you all to get out. So I made notes because I'm not a cartographer, although they are very important. Ask that county in South Georgia that just had their boundaries moved. Anyway, okay. True story, true story. Apparently the sheriff secretly had it done.
Oh.
Right. Go look it up. Google, children. You all can Google. Anyway, so what you are going to do is, if you do exit out the driveways up here, they're encouraging you all to turn right to where you kind of like loop around Commerce and whatnot. Because here's the thing, if you go out this way and want to turn left, everyone coming from Commerce has the right of way. So when traffic backs up, you won't be able to see around them. So if you go out this way, down past the church, past the ball field, there is a chain link fence that's open. Go through the chain link fence. That is a street. If you turn left, you will come out on Commerce over here, much easier. If you turn right, it will take you out to Claremont. If you need to take a picture of my notes, do we got it? Thank you all so much for coming.